The thunder of hoofbeats echoed across the dusty main street of Willow Creek as Gabriella Davis clutched her twin babies to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin, the other end tied to Sheriff Tanner's saddle as he dragged her toward the edge of town in the blazing Arizona sun of 1878. "Please," she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "My babies are innocent. They've done nothing wrong." The 5-month-old twins wailed in unison, their little faces red with distress as they sensed their mother's fear. The small crowd that had gathered watched with a mixture of disgust, pity, and indifference as the young widow was forced from the only home she had known for the past 3 years. From the shadows of the livery stable, Ethan Foster watched, his jaw clenched tight beneath his 3-day stubble. His fingers tightened around the handle of his Winchester rifle as his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. Something wasn't right about this, not at all. "She's a thief and a liar," Sheriff Tanner bellowed for the benefit of the onlookers. "Caught red-handed stealing from Henderson's general store. Willow Creek has no place for her kind." Ethan knew better. In the 3 years since he'd returned from the war and taken up work as a ranch hand at the Double Diamond, he'd crossed paths with Gabriella Davis many times. A more honest woman he'd never met. The death of her husband Thomas from consumption last winter had left her struggling to care for their newborn twins, but steal? Never. "You know what happens to thieves in Willow Creek?" someone shouted from the crowd. Ethan stepped forward, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed dirt. "Tanner," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "You got proof of these accusations?" Sheriff Tanner yanked hard on the rope, causing Gabriella to stumble forward. One of the twins let out a piercing cry. "Stay out of this, Foster. This ain't your business. I'm making it my business." Ethan moved closer, his hand resting casually near the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. At 32, he'd seen enough injustice to last several lifetimes. "Seems mighty convenient you'd accuse the widow Davis of theft right after she rejected your proposal last Sunday." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gabriella's eyes, wide and frantic, found Ethan's. There was a silent plea there that cut straight to his soul. "I found the stolen goods in her cabin myself," Tanner growled, his hand moving to his own gun. "Along with evidence, she's been cooking the books for the bank. Judge Watson's ordered her out of town by sundown." Ethan knew Judge Watson was in the sheriff's pocket, and both men worked for James Henderson, the richest man in the county, who'd been trying to buy Gabriella's small parcel of land for months. The land that, inconveniently for Henderson, contained the only year-round spring for miles. "Let her go, Tanner," Ethan said, his voice dangerously soft. "Those charges won't stand up to scrutiny." "You aiming to die today, Foster?" Tanner's voice carried a warning edge. Gabriella sobbed, clutching her babies tighter. "Please, Ethan, don't get yourself killed on my account." But Ethan had seen too many good people crushed under the boots of powerful men. He'd fought in a war that was supposed to bring justice, only to return to a West still ruled by those with money and guns. He wasn't about to let another innocent person suffer. "I'm aiming to see justice done," Ethan replied. "And everybody here knows the widow Davis is no thief." Several townspeople shuffled uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. They knew he was right, but few had the courage to stand against Sheriff Tanner and, by extension, Henderson. Tanner's face darkened. "Last warning, Foster. Walk away now." Instead, Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's. "Cut her loose." The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a knife. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, with the speed that had kept him alive through the war and the lawless years that followed, Ethan drew and fired in one fluid motion. The bullet sliced through the rope binding Gabriella to the sheriff's horse, sending the animal rearing in surprise. "Run, Gabriella!" Ethan shouted as he dove for cover behind a water trough. Tanner's gun cleared leather a split second too late as Ethan's second shot knocked the weapon from his hand. The sheriff howled in pain and rage. Gabriella didn't hesitate. With her babies clutched tight against her chest, she dashed toward the nearest cover, the blacksmith shop. Bullets from Tanner's deputies kicked up dust at her heels. "Get after her," Tanner bellowed, cradling his bleeding hand. "And kill Foster." Ethan fired twice more, forcing the deputies to seek cover. He'd bought Gabriella seconds, but not much more. He needed to get to his horse. "Mrs. Peters." Ethan called to the baker's wife, who was watching from her doorway. "Help her." The older woman hesitated only a moment before nodding and disappearing inside. Moments later, she emerged from the back of the bakery and hurried toward the blacksmith's shop where Gabriella had taken refuge. Ethan continued to exchange fire with the deputies, keeping them pinned down as he worked his way toward the livery where his mare, Whisper, waited. He knew what he was doing was tantamount to signing his own death warrant in Willow Creek, but he couldn't stand by and watch an innocent woman and her babies be thrown to the wolves. Inside the blacksmith shop, Gabriella was trembling so hard she could barely stand. The twins were screaming in terror, their tiny fists waving in the air. "Here, child," Mrs. Peters said, appearing in the doorway. "Come quickly. My husband's wagon is out back. We'll get you and the little ones away from here." "Why are you helping me?" Gabriella asked, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Peters' expression was grim. "Because I know you ain't no thief, and I know what Tanner and Henderson are really after." She helped Gabriella into the back of the wagon and covered her with a tarp. "My Jacob will drive you to the edge of town. After that, God be with you." Outside, the gunfire was intensifying. Ethan had managed to reach Whisper and was now mounted, riding hard and fast through the back alleys of Willow Creek, drawing the deputies away from where he suspected Gabriella would be escaping. As he passed behind the general store, he caught a glimpse of Jacob Peters' wagon rolling toward the east road out of town. Good. If he could keep Tanner and his men busy long enough, Gabriella might have a chance. Ethan led the pursuit on a wild chase through town, finally breaking free and galloping toward the foothills to the north. Only when he was certain he'd drawn all the pursuers away from Gabriella's escape route did he circle back, riding hard toward the east road. The sun was beginning to set when he finally caught up with the Peters wagon about 3 miles outside of town. Jacob was helping Gabriella down from the back, his kind face lined with worry. "They'll be coming for you both now," the old baker said as Ethan dismounted. "I can't go any further. My Martha needs me." "You've done more than enough, Jacob," Ethan said, clasping the man's shoulder. "Get back to town. Say I threatened you at gunpoint if anyone asks." Jacob nodded grimly. "Godspeed, Foster. Take care of her and those little ones." As Jacob's wagon disappeared back toward town, Ethan turned to Gabriella. Her once neat hair had come loose from its pins, cascading in chestnut waves around her shoulders. Her blue dress was dusty and torn at the hem, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination as she held her babies close. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan adjusted his hat. "Because it was the right thing to do. You've thrown away everything, your job, your home. They'll hang you if they catch you." "Then we better make sure they don't catch us," he replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Can you ride?" Gabriella nodded. "Not well with the babies, but I can manage." Ethan glanced at the twins, who had exhausted themselves with crying and were now sleeping fitfully against their mother's chest. "We'll need supplies, and a safer way to carry them." "I have nothing," she said, the reality of her situation sinking in. "Everything I owned was in that cabin." "I've got a bit of money saved," Ethan said. And I know these hills better than Tanner ever will. There's a trapper's cabin about 10 miles from here where we can spend the night. Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move." He helped Gabriella mount Whisper, then handed the twins up to her one by one before swinging up behind her. The mare snorted at the unusual load, but seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. "Hold on tight," Ethan said, his arms encircling Gabriella and her children as he took the reins. "It's going to be a rough ride." As they rode deeper into the gathering darkness, Gabriella found herself leaning back against Ethan's solid chest, drawing strength from his presence. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since Thomas had drawn his last breath, she didn't feel entirely alone. The trapper's cabin was little more than a one-room shack nestled in a small clearing among the pines. It was dusty and had clearly been abandoned for some time, but it had a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 rickety chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. "It's not much," Ethan said as he lit the single oil lamp he'd found on a shelf, "but it's dry and hidden. Tanner won't think to look this far into the mountains, at least not tonight." Gabriella had settled on the edge of the bed, the twins nestled on either side of her. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done, Ethan, but I don't understand why you risked everything for us." Ethan busied himself with building a small fire in the fireplace. "I've known you for 3 years, Gabriella. You're no thief. But to throw away your life—" He turned to her, his expression serious in the flickering light. "My life wasn't much to speak of. Riding fence for the Double Diamond, drinking at the saloon on Saturday nights, going to church on Sundays to stare at the backs of people's heads. Not much to give up." One of the twins, little Sarah, began to fuss, and Gabriella rocked her gently. "They'll be hungry soon." "I don't have anything to feed them. There's a stream about 50 yards behind the cabin, clean water at least, and I've got some jerky in my saddlebag. Not much of a meal, but it'll keep us going until morning." Gabriella looked down at her babies. At 5 months, they were still primarily nursing, but she'd started giving them a bit of thin porridge to supplement. "We'll need to find milk for them, and proper food." Ethan nodded. "There's a small settlement about a day's ride east Copper Springs. Not much more than a few cabins and a trading post, but they don't answer to Henderson. We can get supplies there." "And then what?" Gabriella asked, the enormity of their situation settling over her. "Where can we go? Tanner will have telegraphed every town within 100 miles by tomorrow." Ethan sat down in one of the rickety chairs, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy hair. "I've got a cousin in Colorado, has a small horse ranch near Durango. He'd take us in, at least until we can figure out something more permanent." "Us?" Gabriella's voice caught. "Ethan, you've done enough. Once we reach this Copper Springs, you could go your own way. This isn't your burden to bear." Ethan's green eyes met hers steadily. "I made my choice back in Willow Creek, Gabriella. I'm not leaving you and the little ones to fend for yourselves. Not unless you tell me to go." The honesty in his gaze made her chest tighten. She'd noticed Ethan Foster around town, of course. It was hard not to notice a man like him, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But Thomas had been her world, and after his death, the twins had consumed every ounce of her attention and energy. "I don't want you to go," she admitted softly. "I'm just afraid of what it will cost you." Ethan's smile was gentle. "Let me worry about that. For now, let's focus on getting through the night. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." As if on cue, both twins began to cry in earnest. Hunger was making its demands known. "I'll fetch some water," Ethan said, rising to his feet, "and see if there's anything useful in this place." While he was gone, Gabriella nursed the babies, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In the space of a few hours, her entire life had been upended. The tiny cabin that had been her home, the garden she'd tended, the life she'd built with Thomas, all gone. And for what? because she'd refused to sell her land to Henderson, because she'd rejected Tanner's unwanted advances. The door creaked open, and Ethan returned with a pail of water. "Found some supplies in a root cellar out back," he said, setting down several dusty cans and a small sack. "Beans, mostly. And some dried apples. Looks like our trapper friend was planning to return." "Should we be taking his things?" Gabriella asked, concerned. "I left a silver dollar, more than fair for what we're taking." Ethan said about opening one of the cans. "How are the little ones? Settled for now?" Gabriella adjusted her dress, having finished nursing. "Sarah and Samuel are good babies, really. They don't usually cry this much." "Being dragged out of town would make anyone cry," Ethan said, his jaw tightening at the memory. What Tanner did was beyond cruel. Gabriella sighed, gently stroking Samuel's downy head. He was angry. "I turned down his proposal last Sunday and then again when he came calling on Wednesday. He said a woman alone couldn't hope to keep her land, that I needed a man's protection. When I told him I'd rather lose the land than marry a man I didn't love, he didn't take it well. So he trumped up theft charges." Ethan shook his head in disgust. Typical Tanner. Always was a small man hiding behind a big badge. "The stolen items he found in my cabin, I've never even seen them before. A silver pocket watch and some fancy stationery from the general store. He must have planted them there when I was at church Sunday morning." Ethan set a can of beans near the fire to warm. "And the accusations about cooking the books at the bank, pure invention. I've never worked at the bank. I take in sewing and washing to make ends meet since Thomas died." Her voice caught on her late husband's name. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I was sorry to hear about Thomas. He seemed a good man." "He was," Gabriella said softly. "He loved this land, said the spring on our property was going to be our children's inheritance, something no one could take away. Except Henderson wants that water for his cattle operation." Gabriella nodded. "He's been trying to buy us out since before Thomas fell ill. Offered a fair price at first, but Thomas wouldn't sell. Said some things weren't meant to be owned by the likes of Henderson. And after Thomas passed, the offers got lower and the visits more frequent. Henderson said a woman alone had no use for such land, that I should be practical and think of my children's future." Her expression hardened. "As if I would ever do anything else." The beans had begun to bubble, and Ethan found a somewhat clean spoon in a drawer. He scooped some into a tin cup and offered it to Gabriella. "Eat. You need to keep up your strength for the little ones." She accepted the cup gratefully, realizing suddenly how hungry she was. "What about you?" "I'll eat after you're done. There's plenty." They sat in companionable silence as Gabriella ate, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional soft sighs from the sleeping twins. "We should try to get some rest," Ethan said finally. "Dawn comes early, and we've got a long ride ahead of us." Gabriella glanced at the single narrow bed. "You take the bed. I can sleep on the floor with the babies." Ethan shook his head. "Absolutely not. You and the twins take the bed. I'll make do right here by the fire." She wanted to argue but was too exhausted. "Wake me if they start fussing." "Sometimes they sleep better if they're walked a bit. I've got experience with babies. My sister had 4 before I left for the war." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his family, but he didn't elaborate. Gabriella wanted to ask more, to learn about the man who had risked everything to save her and her children, but her eyelids were growing heavy. The events of the day had drained her completely. "Rest," Ethan said gently. "I'll keep watch." She must have fallen asleep almost instantly, because the next thing she knew, early morning light was filtering through the cabin's single grimy window. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, checking on the twins. They weren't beside her. Panic surged through her until she spotted Ethan sitting in one of the chairs by the fire, a baby cradled in each arm. He was speaking to them softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be keeping them calm. They were starting to stir, he explained when he noticed she was awake. Didn't want them to wake you just yet. You should have woken me, she said, pushing back the thin blanket that someone Ethan must have placed over her during the night. You needed the sleep. He stood carefully, bringing the twins over to her. They're good company, these two didn't fuss much at all. Gabriella took Sarah and Samuel, who gurgled happily at the sight of their mother. Despite everything, she couldn't help but smile. They seem to like you. Babies are good judges of character, Ethan said with a wink. I've got some water heating for coffee, and there's a bit of jerky left for breakfast. Not much, but it'll get us to Copper Springs. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Gabriella realized she had nothing to pack. Everything she owned had been left behind in Willow Creek. All she had were the clothes on her back, her children, and the man who had come to her rescue. I'm sorry for the trouble I've brought you, she said, as Ethan helped her on to Whisper. They had fashioned a makeshift sling from a spare shirt to help her carry one of the twins, while the other was secured to her chest with a length of rope padded with cloth. You didn't bring me any trouble, Gabriella, Ethan replied, swinging up behind her. Tanner and Henderson did that all on their own. They rode east through the morning, keeping to the forest trails where they would be harder to spot. Ethan was familiar with the terrain, having hunted these mountains many times over the years. He kept them moving at a steady pace, mindful of the babies and the need to stay alert for pursuers. Tell me about your family, Gabriella said during a brief stop to rest the horse and feed the twins. You mentioned a sister. Ethan was scanning the horizon, his expression vigilant. Margaret. She's 5 years older than me. Married a farmer from Kansas before the war. Has 4 children now, or did last I heard. You don't keep in touch. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Not for some years. Her husband didn't approve of me much after I came back from the war. Said I was changed, dangerous. Maybe he was right. The war changed many men, Gabriella said gently. My Thomas came back different too, quieter. He'd wake in the night sometimes, thinking he was still on the battlefield. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Union or Confederate Union? He was with the 11th Illinois Cavalry. You, 1st Texas Mounted Rifles, Confederate. He gave her a wry smile. Seems we fought on opposite sides. The war's been over for 13 years, Gabriella said. I think we can put those differences behind us, especially considering the circumstances. Ethan's smile broadened. Especially considering. They continued their journey, with Ethan sharing stories of his childhood in Texas, and Gabriella telling him about growing up in Illinois before moving west with Thomas after the war. It was strange how easy it was to talk to him, as if they'd known each other for years, rather than having exchanged only brief pleasantries in town before yesterday. The sun was high overhead when they first caught sight of Copper Springs, a small collection of wooden buildings nestled in a narrow valley. It wasn't much of a settlement, just a trading post, a small saloon, a blacksmith shop, and perhaps a dozen cabins scattered about. Not much to look at, Ethan acknowledged, but the people here are independent. They don't cotton to outside authority much. Will they help us? Gabriella asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Or turn us in if Tanner's sent word? Old Jeb Miller runs the trading post. Fought with me in the war. He's a good man, won't turn away someone in need, especially not a woman with young ones. They approached the settlement cautiously, with Ethan watching for any sign of danger. But the only people visible were a couple of men repairing a fence and a woman hanging laundry outside one of the cabins. The trading post was a long, low building with a covered porch. A grizzled man with a white beard was sitting in a rocking chair outside, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as they approached, his eyes narrowing. Well, I'll be damned, he said, setting aside his carving. "Ethan Foster, as I live and breathe. Thought you were settled over at Willow Creek." "Had a change of circumstances, Jeb," Ethan replied, dismounting and helping Gabriella down. "This is Mrs. Gabriella Davis and her children, Sarah and Samuel." Jeb's shrewd eyes took in the situation, quickly the exhausted woman, the babies, Ethan's watchful demeanor. "Running from something, I take it?" "Someone," Ethan corrected. "Sheriff Tanner and James Henderson." Jeb spat over the edge of the porch. "Never did trust either of those snakes. Come on inside. Sarah," he called toward the back of the store, "put on some coffee, we got guests." Inside, the trading post was crammed with supplies of all kinds: tools, foodstuffs, clothing, ammunition, and sundry household items. A plump woman with gray-streaked hair emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. "Land sakes, Ethan Foster, and with a lady and babies too." She hurried forward, immediately taking charge. "You poor dear, you look done in. Come sit by the stove. I've got stew simmering. Have you had anything proper to eat?" Before Gabriella could answer, Sarah Miller was ushering her to a chair, fussing over the twins and ladling out bowls of fragrant stew. The simple kindness brought tears to Gabriella's eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "You're very kind." While the women settled in the back of the store, Jeb pulled Ethan aside. "What kind of trouble are you in, boy?" Ethan quickly explained the situation: Gabriella's false accusation, Tanner's real motives, and their dramatic escape from Willow Creek. Jeb listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. When Ethan finished, the older man sighed heavily. "Henderson's been trying to control all the water rights in the county for years. Man's got more ambition than sense, but crossing him is dangerous business. I didn't have a choice, Jeb. They were going to run her and those babies out into the wilderness with nothing. Might as well have been a death sentence." "Not saying you did wrong," Jeb clarified. "Just saying you've made some powerful enemies. Tanner won't let this go easy, especially not with you making him look the fool in front of the whole town." "I know. That's why we need to keep moving. I'm aiming for my cousin's place near Durango. Can you help us with supplies? I've got some money, but not much." Jeb waved away the mention of payment. "You saved my life at Glorietta Pass, Ethan. I haven't forgotten. Whatever you need, it's yours." With Jeb and Sarah's help, they gathered essential supplies: proper food, including condensed milk for the babies, extra clothing for Gabriella and the twins, a small tent, bedrolls, cooking utensils, and ammunition for Ethan's Winchester. "You'll need another horse," Jeb said. "Can't make it to Durango with all of you on one mount." "I was hoping to buy one from you," Ethan admitted. Jeb stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Got an old paint mare. Not much to look at, but she's steady and good-natured. Good with inexperienced riders. How much? Consider her a loan." "You can send her back when you're settled." Ethan started to protest, but Jeb cut him off. "Don't argue with an old man, Foster. Besides, Sarah's taken quite a shine to those twins. She'll never forgive me if I don't do everything I can to help them." While the men sorted out the horses and supplies, Sarah had drawn a bath for Gabriella and the babies in a tin tub behind the store. The warm water was heavenly after their ordeal, and Sarah had even found a clean dress that, while a bit loose, fit Gabriella well enough. "Such beautiful babies," Sarah cooed as she helped dry and dress the twins. "You must be so proud." "They're all I have left of my Thomas," Gabriella said softly, watching as Sarah gently tickled Samuel's belly, making him giggle. "I don't know what I would have done if Ethan hadn't helped us." Sarah's eyes twinkled knowingly. "He's a good man, that Ethan Foster, one of the best. Not many would risk what he has for someone else." Gabriella felt a flush creep up her neck. "He's been very kind." "More than kind, I'd wager," Sarah replied with a smile. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching. Well, it reminds me of how my Jeb used to look at me when we were young." "Oh no, it's not like that," Gabriella protested, though her heart gave a curious flutter. "We barely know each other." Sarah just smiled and handed her a freshly diapered Sarah. "Sometimes the heart knows things the head hasn't figured out yet. My mother used to say that crisis shows the true measure of a person. Seems to me you've both been measured and found worthy." Before Gabriella could respond, the door opened and Ethan stepped in. He stopped short at the sight of her in the clean dress, her damp hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Something flickered in his eyes' surprise, followed by something warmer. "We're all set," he said, clearing his throat. "Jeb's given us a good mare for you to ride. We can head out whenever you're ready." "I'll just finish up with the babies," Gabriella said, suddenly feeling shy under his gaze. Sarah packed them a bundle of fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit for the journey, along with a small jar of her homemade applesauce for the twins. "They're starting to need more than just milk," she explained. "This will be gentle on their little stomachs." As they prepared to depart, Jeb pulled Ethan aside one last time. "Word came through yesterday that a gang of riders has been spotted heading this way from Willow Creek. Didn't think much of it then, but now I'm wondering if Tanner's already on your trail." Ethan's expression darkened. "How many?" "5 or 6 from what I heard. Heavily armed. We need to move fast. Is there a back way out of town?" Jeb nodded. "Trail leads up through the eastern pass. It's steep, but it'll put you a good day's ride ahead of anyone coming the main road. I'll send them on a false trail if they show up here asking questions." "I owe you, Jeb." The older man clasped Ethan's shoulder firmly. "Just get that woman and her babies to safety. That'll be payment enough." With their new supplies loaded, and Gabriella mounted on the gentle paint mare that Jeb had provided, they set off toward the eastern trail. The twins were secured in a much improved carrying arrangement, a sort of pack that allowed Gabriella to carry one on her back and one in front, distributing the weight more evenly and leaving her hands free for the reins. "They're good people," Gabriella said as they left Copper Springs behind. "I wish we could have stayed longer." "So do I," Ethan agreed. "But if Tanner's men are already on our trail, we can't risk it. Better to keep moving." The eastern pass was as steep as Jeb had warned. The trail wound upward through dense pine forest, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of the valley below. It was slow going with the heavily laden horses, but they made steady progress. By late afternoon, they had reached the top of the pass. Ethan called a halt near a small stream, allowing the horses to drink and rest. "How are you holding up?" he asked, helping Gabriella dismount. "I'm all right," she assured him, though her muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding. "The twins have been remarkably good." As if on cue, Samuel began to fuss, followed almost immediately by his sister. Gabriella laughed softly. "I spoke too soon." "They're probably hungry, and so are you, I'd wager. Let's make camp here for a bit. We can cover more ground before nightfall, but a proper rest will do us all good." While Gabriella tended to the twins, Ethan built a small, smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal from the provisions Sarah had packed for them. They ate in companionable silence, watching as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. "How far to Durango from here?" Gabriella asked, gently rocking Sarah, who was fighting sleep despite her obvious exhaustion. 4 days, maybe 5 with the babies," Ethan replied, sipping the strong coffee he'd brewed. "We'll need to cross the San Juan River, but there's a ferry at Ignacio. After that, it's fairly easy going." "And your cousin, he won't mind us arriving unannounced," Ethan smiled. "Daniel's a good sort. Haven't seen him in a few years, but we write now and then. He's got plenty of space, and he always said I was welcome if I ever tired of drifting." "You've been drifting long?" "Since the war, more or less. Tried settling a few times, but nothing stuck until Willow Creek. Thought I might put down roots there." His expression turned rueful. "Guess that plan's done for. Gabriella felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry you had to leave because of us." Ethan's eyes met hers steadily. "Don't be. Willow Creek was just another stop along the way. I'm starting to think maybe I was just waiting for something worth fighting for." The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. She looked away, focusing on the sleeping baby in her arms. "We should probably get moving again if we want to make more progress before dark." They continued their journey through the late afternoon, following the trail as it began its descent on the eastern side of the mountains. The terrain was rougher here, with loose shale that required careful navigation. Ethan led the way, frequently looking back to ensure Gabriella and the twins were managing. As the sun began to set, they found a sheltered hollow beneath a rocky overhang, a natural campsite that would protect them from the elements and hide their fire from prying eyes. Ethan efficiently set up camp, pitching the small tent for Gabriella and the twins while she prepared a simple supper. There was an easy rhythm to their cooperation, as if they'd been traveling together for years rather than a single day. "I'll take first watch," Ethan said as they sat before the small fire, the twins finally asleep in the tent behind them. "You should get some rest." "You need sleep too," Gabriella protested. "You've hardly rested since we left Willow Creek." "I'm used to going without," he assured her. "Army life teaches you that quick enough." Gabriella studied him in the firelight, noting the fine lines around his eyes, the way the flames highlighted the angles of his face. "You never talk about the war, not directly." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Not much to tell that's worth hearing. Lot of dying for causes that seemed important at the time. Lot of good men lost. Thomas was the same way. He'd talk around it, never about it." "Some things are better left buried," Ethan said softly. "But the war taught me one thing worth keeping: how to tell what's worth fighting for and what isn't." "And what's worth fighting for?" Gabriella asked, drawn in by the quiet intensity of his voice. Ethan's eyes lifted to meet hers across the fire. "Family. Honor. People who can't fight for themselves." He paused. "You and your children, Gabriella, you're worth fighting for." The simple declaration made her breath catch. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not just the quiet ranch hand who tipped his hat to her in town, or the skilled gunman who had faced down Tanner without flinching, but the man beneath. A man of principle and courage, of gentleness and strength. "Thank you," she whispered. Unable to find more adequate words, he nodded, seeming to understand all she couldn't say. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early and we've got a long ride ahead." Gabriella retreated to the tent, where the twins slept peacefully on the bedroll. As she settled beside them, she found herself thinking of Ethan sitting guard outside, keeping them safe. The thought brought an unexpected comfort and something else a fluttering in her chest that she hadn't felt since Thomas first courted her years ago. She tried to dismiss the feeling. It was merely gratitude, she told herself. Appreciation for his protection. Nothing more. She'd been a widow for less than a year with 2 infants to raise. Romance was the last thing she should be considering. Yet as sleep claimed her, it was Ethan's face. She saw his green eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled, the quiet strength in his hands as he held her babies, the unwavering certainty in his voice when he said she was worth fighting for. Morning came with a chill mist hanging over the mountains. Gabriella awoke to find the twins already being tended to by Ethan, who had somehow managed to change their cloths and was now awkwardly trying to feed Samuel a bit of applesauce. "You're a natural," she said, sitting up and rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Ethan looked up, a sheepish smile crossing his face. "Not sure Samuel agrees. Most of it seems to be ending up on me rather than in him." Gabriella laughed, a sound that surprised her with its ease. "Here, let me help." She took the small jar and spoon from him, demonstrating the proper technique. The trick is to wait until he opens his mouth to cry, then slip the spoon in. He'll be so surprised he'll forget to protest. Sure enough, when Samuel opened his mouth to wail, Gabriella deftly slipped in a tiny spoonful of applesauce. The baby's eyes widened in surprise, then he smacked his lips appreciatively. "See, he's not so hard to outsmart," Gabriella teased. "How long have you been up?" "You were supposed to wake me for my turn at watch. You needed the sleep more than I did," Ethan replied, wiping applesauce from his shirt. "Besides, the little ones here were good company once they woke up. Did you sleep at all? An hour or two, enough?" He stood, stretching his tall frame. "We should get moving. I want to put as much distance as possible between us and any pursuit before midday." They broke camp efficiently, with Gabriella handling the twins while Ethan packed up their gear. By the time the sun had fully risen, they were back on the trail, heading east toward Durango. The day passed in much the same manner as the previous one, steady travel interspersed with breaks to rest the horses and tend to the twins. Ethan remained vigilant, frequently scanning their back trail for any sign of pursuit, but they encountered no other travelers. As they rode, Gabriella found herself watching Ethan when he wasn't looking. The way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the gentleness with which he handled the babies during their stops, the quiet competence he brought to every task. Thomas had been a good man, a loving husband, but he'd never been fully comfortable in the wild country of the West. Ethan, by contrast, seemed to belong here among the mountains and forests. "Tell me more about your cousin's ranch," she said as they paused at midday beside a small creek. The twins were napping, giving them a rare moment of quiet. "It's nothing fancy," Ethan replied, refilling their canteens. "About 100 acres in a valley north of Durango. Good grazing land, a creek running through it. Daniel breeds quarter horses, has a good reputation for it, from what I hear. His wife died of fever a few years back, but he's got 2 boys, must be nearly grown now. Do you think he'll really take us in? A woman and 2 babies would be quite a burden." Ethan's expression softened. "Daniel's not the kind to turn away family or those in need." "Besides, you're hardly a burden, Gabriella. You're the strongest woman I've ever known." She blushed at the unexpected compliment. "I'm just doing what any mother would do." "No," he said seriously. "Most would have broken under what you've endured. Losing your husband, raising twins alone, standing up to men like Henderson and Tanner. That takes real courage." Before she could respond, the sound of a distant gunshot echoed through the valley. Ethan was instantly alert, one hand going to his rifle. "Get the babies," he said quietly, all warmth gone from his voice. "We need to move. Now." Gabriella didn't question him, quickly gathering the still sleeping twins and securing them in their carrying packs. Ethan helped her mount, then swung up onto Whisper, his eyes scanning the trail behind them. "Was that Tanner?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. "Can't be sure, but we're not waiting to find out. There's a box canyon about 2 miles ahead. We can lose them there if it is Tanner's men." They rode hard, the babies waking and beginning to cry at the jostling pace. Gabriella tried to soothe them as best she could while keeping up with Ethan, who was pushing the horses as fast as was safe on the rocky trail. They reached the box canyon as another shot rang out, closer this time. Ethan led them into the narrow entrance, following a path that wound between towering rock walls. "There's a cave system up ahead," he explained as they rode deeper into the canyon. "Used to be an old Apache hideout. We can lose them in there." The path narrowed further, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses. Ethan took Sarah from Gabriella, carrying the baby against his chest as they hurried forward. The canyon walls loomed above them, blocking out much of the daylight and casting them into shadow. Finally, they reached a dark opening in the rock face, the entrance to the cave Ethan had mentioned. He quickly tied the horses in a small copse of trees that would hide them from casual observation, then helped Gabriella gather their essential supplies. "Stay close to me," he warned as they entered the cave. "It's easy to get lost in here." The cave was cool and damp, the air heavy with the scent of earth and stone. Ethan produced a small lantern from his pack, lighting it to reveal a spacious chamber that branched off into several smaller tunnels. "How did you know about this place?" Gabriella whispered, trying to quiet the frightened twins. "Spent some time with the Apache after the war," Ethan replied, leading her toward one of the tunnels. "Learned their ways, their hiding places. This system runs all through the mountain. Multiple exits. We can wait them out, then leave by a different route." They made their way deeper into the cave system, finally settling in a small chamber where a tiny stream trickled along one wall. Ethan set the lantern on a rock shelf, its light casting long shadows across the rough walls. "We should be safe here," he said, keeping his voice low. "Sound carries strangely in caves. Best to whisper." Gabriella nodded, rocking the twins gently to calm them. The cave was chilly, and she drew them closer for warmth. Noticing her discomfort, Ethan removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I'll check the entrance, make sure we weren't followed. Will you be all right here for a few minutes?" "Yes," she whispered, though the thought of being alone in the darkness terrified her. "Be careful." He touched her cheek briefly, the gesture so unexpected that she forgot to breathe for a moment. "Always am." Left alone with the babies, Gabriella tried to focus on them rather than the oppressive darkness beyond the lantern's glow. She sang softly to them, old lullabies her mother had sung to her as a child. Gradually they settled, their cries fading to soft whimpers, then silence as they drifted off to sleep. Time seemed to stretch in the cave, minutes feeling like hours. Just as she was beginning to worry, she heard the soft scuff of boots on stone. Ethan emerged from the tunnel, his expression grim. "Tanner?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. "Him and 5 others. They're searching the canyon now. Haven't found the cave entrance yet, but it's just a matter of time." "What do we do?" "Wait. Let them search themselves out. There are too many for us to fight, but they won't want to be in these mountains after dark. Tanner's a town man, he'll get nervous as night falls." Ethan settled beside her, their shoulders touching in the small space. "How are the little ones?" "Sleeping, finally. They're exhausted, poor things." Gabriella sighed. "I never thought my choices would lead to this hiding in a cave with my babies, running for our lives." "This isn't your fault," Ethan said firmly. "You stood up for what was right for your land, for your children's future. There's no shame in that. But at what cost? We've lost everything. My home, your job, we're fugitives now." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Some things are worth more than homes or jobs, Gabriella. Freedom, justice, the right to choose your own path." He paused. "I don't regret helping you, not for a moment." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. In the dim light of the lantern, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes gleamed with certainty. "Why did you really help us, Ethan?" she asked softly. "The truth." He met her gaze steadily. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch you suffer. Because from the first day I saw you in Willow Creek, carrying water from the well with your belly round with child, I thought you were the strongest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." Gabriella's heart pounded in her chest. "You never said anything. You were married to a good man." "It wasn't my place." His voice grew softer. "And after he passed, you had your grief and your babies. The last thing you needed was another man making demands on you. It wouldn't have been unwelcome," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I noticed you too, Ethan, your kindness. The way you always tipped your hat to me, even when others in town began to look through me after Thomas died." A faint smile touched his lips. "Didn't think you'd noticed." "I did." She hesitated, then reached out to touch his hand. "I do." The moment hung between them, fragile and potent. Then Samuel stirred against her chest, breaking the spell. Ethan drew back slightly, clearing his throat. "We should try to rest while we can," he said. "Once night falls, we'll make our move." Gabriella nodded, feeling both relieved and disappointed at the interruption. She settled back against the cave wall, adjusting the babies more comfortably against her. Despite the hard stone at her back and the danger lurking outside, she felt oddly secure with Ethan beside her, his steady presence a comfort in the darkness. Hours passed in quiet conversation as they waited for night to fall. Ethan told her more about his time with the Apache, how they had taught him to survive in the wilderness, to read the land and sky. Gabriella shared stories of her childhood in Illinois, of her parents' small farm and the sisters she hadn't seen since moving west with Thomas. "You ever think of going back east?" Ethan asked as they shared a small meal of jerky and dried fruit. "Sometimes," she admitted. Especially after Thomas died. But the twins were newborns and the journey seemed impossible. And then she trailed off. And then I realized that despite everything, I love it here. The mountains, the sky that goes on forever. I want my children to grow up free, not crowded in some city tenement." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West gets in your blood. For all its hardships, there's a beauty here you can't find anywhere else." Eventually, the twins woke hungry and demanding. Gabriella fed them while Ethan politely turned away, giving her what privacy he could in the confined space. Afterward, he surprised her by expertly burping Samuel, his large hand gentle on the baby's tiny back. "You really are good with them," she remarked. "Like I said, my sister had 4. I was home between campaigns during the war when her second and third were born. Learned quick how to make myself useful." As the last of the daylight faded outside, Ethan extinguished the lantern. "We need to preserve the oil," he explained. "And our eyes will adjust better to the darkness this way." In the pitch blackness of the cave, Gabriella felt a momentary panic. She reached out instinctively, finding Ethan's hand. "It's all right," he murmured, his fingers closing around hers. "I'm right here, I won't leave you." The simple promise eased her fear. They sat together in the darkness, their hands linked, listening to the soft breathing of the sleeping twins and the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the cave. After what seemed an eternity, Ethan stirred. "It's time." They'll have made camp by now, or maybe even headed back down the trail a ways. "We'll take one of the other exits and circle around." He relit the lantern, keeping the flame low, and helped Gabriella secure the twins for travel. They gathered their supplies and moved carefully through the twisting passages of the cave, Ethan leading confidently, despite the minimal light. True to his word, they emerged from a different opening, this one high on the canyon wall with a steep but navigable path leading down. The night was clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to see by. "The horses," Gabriella whispered as they picked their way down the slope. "We'll have to retrieve them," Ethan replied. "I'll go first, make sure the way is clear. If anything happens, head north along that ridge." He pointed to a dark line against the star-filled sky. "Keep the moon on your right. You'll hit the main trail by morning." "Nothing's going to happen," she said firmly, refusing to consider the alternative. Ethan gave her a quick smile. "That's the spirit." They reached the canyon floor without incident and made their way cautiously back toward where they had left the horses. Ethan moved like a shadow, his steps nearly silent on the rocky ground. Gabriella followed as best she could, grateful that the twins remained asleep. As they neared the copse of trees, Ethan suddenly held up a hand, signaling for her to stop. He dropped to a crouch, motioning for her to do the same. In the silvery moonlight, she could just make out a figure moving among the trees where they had left their mounts. Ethan drew his revolver, his expression hardening. He motioned for Gabriella to stay put, then began to circle around, using the boulders scattered across the canyon floor for cover. Gabriella's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would wake the babies. She watched as Ethan disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with her sleeping children and the nameless fear that clawed at her throat. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, suddenly, there was a shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. Gabriella held her breath, clutching the twins tightly. When Ethan reappeared, he was leading both their horses and had a grin set to his mouth. "One of Tanner's men," he explained quietly as he reached her, "was trying to sabotage the saddles. He won't be following us anymore. Did you?" She couldn't finish the question. "No," Ethan assured her. "Just knocked him cold and tied him up. But he'll raise the alarm when he's found or manages to get free. We need to move fast." They mounted quickly, Ethan taking both twins to allow Gabriella to ride unencumbered. The horses picked their way carefully out of the canyon, emerging onto the main trail under the watchful light of the moon. "We'll ride through the night," Ethan said, settling the sleeping Sarah more securely against his chest. "Put as many miles between us and Tanner as we can. There's a trading post at Manco's we can reach by dawn if we push hard." Gabriella nodded, too exhausted and frightened to argue. She followed Ethan's lead, trusting him to find the way through the darkness. As they rode, she found herself watching him, the strong line of his back, the careful way he held Sarah, the alertness that never seemed to leave him despite his obvious fatigue. She had never expected to find herself in such a situation, fleeing across the wilderness with a man she barely knew, yet trusted with her life and the lives of her children. Nor had she expected the feelings that were growing within her, a warmth that went beyond gratitude, a connection that seemed to strengthen with each passing hour. Thomas would have understood, she thought. He had been a practical man, kind and loving. He would have wanted her to find happiness again, to have someone to share the burden of raising their children. But was that what Ethan wanted? Or was he simply doing what his conscience demanded, helping a woman and children in need? The night wore on, the horses maintaining a steady pace through the moonlit landscape. Occasionally, Ethan would call a brief halt to rest the animals and check on the twins, but they never stopped for long. Always there was the knowledge that Tanner and his men were somewhere behind them, perhaps gaining ground. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when they finally caught sight of the trading post at Manco's, a sturdy log building surrounded by a few smaller structures. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcome sign that someone was awake and, hopefully, willing to offer assistance. As they approached, a tall, lean man emerged onto the porch, a shotgun held casually in his hands. He watched their approach with wary eyes, not lowering his weapon until they were close enough for him to see the babies Ethan carried. "Early travelers," the man commented, his voice gravelly with age. "And with little ones no less. What brings you to Manco's at this hour?" "Need supplies and fresh horses if you have them," Ethan replied, dismounting carefully so as not to disturb the twins. "And a safe place to rest for a few hours." The man, Sam Billings, as he introduced himself, seemed to sense that there was more to their story than Ethan was sharing, but he asked no questions. He showed them to a small room behind the trading post where his late wife had once quilted, offering the use of a narrow bed for Gabriella and the twins. "Got some milk from my goat," he said gruffly, setting down a small jug. "Good for the little ones. And there's coffee on the stove whenever you're ready." While Gabriella settled the twins and saw to their needs, Ethan spoke privately with Billings, explaining their situation in hushed tones. When he returned, his expression was relieved. "Billings says he hasn't seen any sign of Tanner or his men, but he'll keep watch and warn us if anyone approaches. He's agreed to trade our tired horses for fresh ones, and he's throwing in extra supplies at a fair price." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "We should be able to rest for a few hours, then push on to Durango. We could be at Daniel's ranch by tomorrow evening if all goes well." "You need to sleep, Ethan," Gabriella said firmly. "You've been going without rest for too long. I'll keep watch while you get some sleep." For once, he didn't argue. He sank down onto a chair, tipped his head back against the wall, and was asleep almost instantly. Gabriella watched him for a moment, noting how even in sleep he maintained a certain vigilance, one hand resting near his holstered revolver. She turned her attention to the twins, who were happily exploring their new surroundings. Samuel had discovered his toes and was attempting to fit them into his mouth, while Sarah was intently studying a patch of sunlight on the wooden floor. Their resilience amazed her, despite the danger and discomfort of their flight. They seemed to be taking everything in stride. "Your papa would be so proud of you," she whispered, stroking Sarah's downy head. "And I think he would approve of Mr. Foster too." The thought surprised her, but she knew it was true. Thomas had been a good judge of character. He would have recognized in Ethan the same qualities she was coming to admire: courage, integrity, and a gentle strength that showed itself most clearly in his care for her children. After seeing to the twins' needs and helping herself to some of Billings' strong coffee, Gabriella found herself growing drowsy. The narrow bed was calling to her, but Ethan was still asleep in the chair, and someone needed to stay alert. As if sensing her dilemma, Billings appeared in the doorway. "Get some rest, madam," he said kindly. "I'll keep an eye on things. No one's coming up on this place without me knowing about it." Grateful, Gabriella settled onto the bed with the twins. Despite her intention to stay awake a little longer, the exhaustion of the past days caught up with her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the sound of quiet conversation. Opening her eyes, she saw Ethan and Billings standing near the doorway, examining a map spread between them. The light slanting through the small window told her it was late afternoon. "There's a back trail here," Billings was saying, his gnarled finger tracing a line on the map. "Not many know about it. It'll add half a day to your journey, but you won't risk running into any trouble coming up from Willow Creek." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "Appreciate the advice, Sam, and everything else you've done for us." Gabriella sat up, careful not to disturb the still sleeping twins. Ethan turned at the movement, a smile softening his features when he saw she was awake. "Feeling better?" he asked, crossing to sit on the edge of the bed. "Much," she admitted. "How long did I sleep?" "About 6 hours. The little ones woke up once, but Billings here showed me how to feed them that goat's milk. They seem to like it well enough." 6 hours? She was horrified. "We should have been on the road hours ago. Tanner could be resting was the right call," Ethan interrupted gently. "The horses needed it as much as we did, and Billings has been keeping watch. No sign of Tanner or his men. Not that they'd come this way if they had any sense," Billings added. "Trail from Willow Creek to here is a hard one, especially if you don't know these mountains. More likely they've headed back to regroup, maybe telegraph ahead to Durango to watch for you there." "Which is why we're taking the back trail," Ethan explained, indicating the map. "It'll bring us into Durango from the north, away from the main roads where they might be watching. From there, it's just a few hours to Daniel's ranch." The plan was sound, and Gabriella felt some of her anxiety ease. They might actually make it to safety after all. With fresh horses and replenished supplies, they set out from Mancos as the sun was beginning to set. Billings had provided them with detailed directions for the back trail, and even a crude map drawn on a scrap of paper. The trail was rougher than the main road, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes, but it was well hidden and unlikely to be known to Tanner or his men. They rode through the night again, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and tend to the twins. The babies were becoming increasingly fussy with the constant travel, and Gabriella worried about the toll it was taking on them. But there was no alternative, they had to keep moving. Dawn found them high in the mountains, with a breathtaking view of the valley below where Durango nestled along the Animas River. From this distance, the town looked peaceful, a collection of buildings huddled along the riverbank, smoke rising from morning fires. "We'll circle around to the north," Ethan said, pointing to a ridge that ran parallel to the valley. "Daniel's place is about 5 miles beyond that stand of pines." By midday, they were approaching a broad meadow where horses grazed peacefully. Beyond it stood a sprawling ranch house built of logs and stone, with several outbuildings scattered around it. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney, and the sound of hammering could be heard from one of the barns. "That's it," Ethan said, a note of relief in his voice. "Daniel's place. We made it." As they rode into the yard, the hammering stopped, and a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the barn. He stood watching their approach, one hand shading his eyes against the midday sun. Then recognition dawned on his face. "Ethan. Ethan Foster, is that you?" He strode forward, breaking into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned. When I got your letter last spring, I thought you might actually visit this time, but then months went by." "Hello, Daniel," Ethan replied, dismounting and clasping his cousin's outstretched hand. "Sorry for arriving unannounced." "We've had a bit of trouble." Daniel's gaze moved to Gabriella and the twins, his expression shifting to one of concern. "So I see. Well, don't just sit there, madam. Come on down and welcome to the Double F Ranch." Gabriella allowed Ethan to help her dismount, grateful for the support as her legs threatened to buckle after the long ride. The twins, roused from sleep by the stop, began to fuss in earnest. "This is Mrs. Gabriella Davis and her children, Sarah and Samuel," Ethan explained. "Gabriella, this is my cousin, Daniel Foster." Daniel's weathered face softened as he looked at the babies. "Beautiful children. And you all look done in. Come inside, please. My housekeeper, Mrs. Lowry, will have dinner on soon, and we can see about getting you settled." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly spacious and comfortable, with well-worn furniture, colorful rugs, and the unmistakable touches of a home rather than just a house. Mrs. Lowry, a plump, motherly woman with iron-gray hair, took one look at Gabriella and the twins and immediately began issuing orders. "Baths for everyone, fresh clothes, and proper food," she declared. "Those babies need a quiet place to rest, and so do you, my dear. You look ready to drop." While Mrs. Lowry whisked Gabriella and the twins upstairs to the guest rooms, Daniel led Ethan to his study, where he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and settled into a chair opposite his cousin. "Now," he said after they had both taken a sip, "suppose you tell me what kind of trouble brings you to my doorstep with a beautiful woman and 2 babies in tow." Ethan recounted the events of the past days, starting with Tanner's false accusations against Gabriella and ending with their narrow escape through the mountains. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Sounds like this Tanner is a real piece of work," he commented when Ethan had finished. "And Henderson's no better. Men like that give the West a bad name." "They won't give up easily," Ethan warned. "Tanner's pride is wounded and Henderson still wants that water rights. They might track us here eventually." Daniel waved a dismissive hand. "Let them try. San Juan County knows me. I've been here 20 years, served as a deputy for half that time before I took up ranching full-time. My word carries weight with Sheriff Miller. If Tanner shows his face around here, he'll get a cold welcome. I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Daniel. Family helps family, Ethan. You know that." Daniel refilled their glasses. "Besides, sounds to me like the widow Davis has a legitimate claim to her land. If Henderson wants it, he should offer a fair price, not run her out of town on trumped-up charges." Upstairs, Gabriella was experiencing the blissful luxury of a hot bath, the first she'd had since Sarah Miller's kindness back at Copper Springs. Mrs. Lowry had insisted on taking the twins, assuring Gabriella that she had raised 5 children of her own and knew how to handle babies. "You take your time, dear," the housekeeper had said firmly. "Those little ones will be fine with me for an hour. You need to wash away the trail dust and give your spirit a chance to settle." Now, soaking in the copper tub filled with steaming water, Gabriella felt the tension of the past days beginning to ebb. They were safe, at least for the moment. The twins were being cared for, and Ethan's cousin seemed genuinely willing to help them. Ethan. The thought of him brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the bathwater. Over the course of their journey, something had shifted between them. What had begun as a rescue had become something deeper, a partnership, a friendship, and perhaps the beginnings of something more. But what did the future hold? They couldn't stay at Daniel's ranch forever. Eventually, decisions would have to be made. Would they try to reclaim her land in Willow Creek? Move on to somewhere new? And where did Ethan fit into those plans? These questions swirled in her mind as she dressed in the clean clothes Mrs. Lowry had provided a simple blue dress that was slightly too large but felt wonderful after days in her travel-worn garments. She brushed out her damp hair and pinned it up as best she could, then went in search of her children. She found them in a sunny room at the end of the hall, lying on a quilt spread on the floor while Mrs. Lowry sat nearby, knitting and keeping a watchful eye on them. Both babies were clean, dressed in what appeared to be newly sewn gowns, and happily exploring their surroundings. "There you are, my dear," Mrs. Lowry said, setting aside her knitting. "Don't they clean up nicely? My youngest grandbaby outgrew these things just last month. Seemed providential that I hadn't packed them away yet." "They look wonderful," Gabriella said, kneeling beside the twins. "You've been so kind, Mrs. Lowry. I don't know how to thank you." "Nonsense. It's a joy to have little ones in the house again. Mr. Foster's boys are nearly grown, 18 and 16 now, and more interested in horses and girls than spending time with an old woman like me." She smiled fondly. "Speaking of Mr. Foster, he asked that you join him and his cousin for dinner once you were ready. Said there are matters to discuss." Dinner was served in a spacious dining room dominated by a long oak table. Daniel Foster sat at the head, with Ethan to his right and Gabriella to his left. The twins had been settled in a makeshift cradle, actually a dresser drawer padded with blankets near Gabriella's chair. The meal was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans from the kitchen garden. After days of trail rations, it seemed like a feast fit for royalty. "Mrs. Lowry is a treasure," Daniel said, noting Gabriella's appreciation of the food. "Been with me since Martha passed, going on 8 years now. Don't know what I'd do without her." "The boys aren't joining us?" Ethan asked, glancing at the empty chairs. "They're over at the Henderson place," Daniel caught himself, wincing slightly. "Not your Henderson. Ours is a decent sort. His daughter Emma is sweet on my Jacob. They rode over this morning to help with a barn raising and probably won't be back until late." As they ate, Daniel outlined the situation as he saw it. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he assured them. "We've plenty of room, and Mrs. Lowry would be delighted to have a woman and babies in the house again. But I understand you might want to consider your options." "I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely," Gabriella said, though the thought of having a safe place for her children was deeply tempting. "It's no imposition," Daniel insisted. "Family helps family, and any friend of Ethan's is family to me." Ethan had been unusually quiet during the meal, seemingly lost in thought. Now he looked up, his expression resolute. "There's something else to consider. Gabriella's land in Willow Creek, it's rightfully hers. Henderson has no legal claim to it." Daniel nodded slowly. "True enough." And if the charges against her are as false as you say, there might be legal recourse. I know a good lawyer in Durango, Joshua Stern. Man's as sharp as they come. He might be able to help. You really think there's a chance? Gabriella asked, hope and doubt warring within her. Tanner has the judge in his pocket, and Henderson has money and influence. Money and influence only go so far, Daniel replied. Colorado territory has laws and judges who take their responsibilities seriously. If we can get your case before a territorial court rather than that corrupt local judge, you might stand a chance. It would mean staying here for some time, Ethan pointed out. Legal proceedings don't move quickly. As I said, you're both welcome for as long as needed. Daniel's gaze moved between them, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. After dinner, while Mrs. Lowry settled the twins for the night in the room adjoining Gabriella's, the three adults retired to Daniel's study to continue their discussion. The lawyer, Joshua Stern, would be invited to the ranch the following day to assess the situation. One thing I don't understand, Daniel said as they settled with after-dinner coffee. Why is this land so important to Henderson? There must be plenty of other properties with water rights in the county. The spring on Gabriella's land feeds into Willow Creek itself, Ethan explained. It's the headwater. Whoever controls that spring essentially controls water access for miles downstream, which means controlling who can graze cattle in the entire valley. Daniel let out a low whistle. No wonder he's so determined. That's not just about water for his current operation, that's about monopolizing the whole region. Thomas understood that, Gabriella said quietly. It's why he refused to sell, even when the offers were generous. He said some things shouldn't be owned by one man, especially not a man like Henderson who would use it to control others. The conversation continued late into the evening, exploring various legal and practical options. By the time they retired for the night, a tentative plan had been formed. They would consult with Stern, gather evidence of the false charges, and petition the territorial court for a hearing. In the meantime, Gabriella and the twins would remain safely at the Double F Ranch, while Ethan would help Daniel with the horses and make himself useful around the property. As Ethan walked Gabriella to her room, a comfortable silence settled between them. Outside her door, she turned to face him, suddenly shy despite all they had been through together. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. You don't need to thank me, Gabriella." "Yes, I do. You've given up everything to help us, your home, your job, your safety." "I don't know if I can ever repay that." Ethan's eyes softened in the lamplight of the hallway. "I don't want repayment, I just want." He hesitated, seeming to struggle for words. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked softly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I want you and the twins to be safe. I want you to have the life you deserve, and I want—" He took a deep breath. "I want to be part of that life if you'll have me." Gabriella's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Ethan, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon and there's so much uncertainty ahead. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Before she could respond, one of the twins began to cry, the sound carrying clearly from her room. Ethan stepped back, breaking the moment. "You should go to them," he said. "We can talk more tomorrow." Gabriella nodded, torn between the need to comfort her child and the desire to finish this conversation. "Tomorrow," she agreed, but tomorrow brought new complications. Joshua Stern arrived in the morning, a serious man with spectacles and a no-nonsense manner that inspired immediate confidence. After hearing their story, he agreed that they had a strong case against Henderson and Tanner, but cautioned that it would not be easily won. "The territorial courts are backlogged," he explained as they gathered in Daniel's study. "It could be months before your case is heard. And even if we win, Enforcing the judgment in Willow Creek could be problematic if Tanner and Henderson still hold sway there. "So what are our options?" Ethan asked, his frustration evident. "We proceed with the legal case," Stern replied calmly. "Gather affidavits from anyone in Willow Creek who might testify to Mrs. Davis's character and the falsity of the charges. The Peterses might be willing, perhaps others. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davis remains safely here, away from Tanner's influence." "And my land?" Gabriella asked. "What's to stop Henderson from simply taking it while I'm gone?" "Legally, nothing," Stern admitted. "But practically speaking, he'd be a fool to do so while there's a case pending. It would only strengthen our argument that he's acting in bad faith." The lawyer promised to begin the necessary paperwork immediately and suggested that someone trustworthy should return to Willow Creek to gather evidence and statements from potential witnesses. "I'll go," Ethan said without hesitation. "No." Gabriella's response was immediate and vehement. "It's too dangerous. Tanner would arrest you on sight or worse." "She's right," Daniel agreed. "Sending you back would be handing Tanner exactly what he wants. I can go instead. No one there knows me, and I still have contacts in law enforcement who can provide some protection if needed." Ethan looked ready to argue, but Stern nodded approvingly. "A sensible approach. Mr. Foster can gather the evidence we need without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, you should both remain here where it's safe." The matter was settled, though Ethan clearly wasn't happy about it. Daniel would leave for Willow Creek the following day, accompanied by one of Stern's clerks who would handle the legal aspects of collecting statements. That afternoon, Daniel took Ethan out to see the horse operation, giving Gabriella some time alone with her thoughts and her children. She sat in the shade of a large oak tree near the house, watching as the twins explored the new sensation of grass beneath their hands and knees. Mrs. Lowry brought out lemonade and sat with her for a while, her knitting needles clicking steadily as they talked. The older woman had a way of drawing out confidences without seeming to pry. "He's a good man, that Ethan," she remarked casually. "Always was, even as a boy. Daniel says he used to spend summers here before the war, had a way with horses that was almost magical. Could gentle the wildest Mustang with just patience and kindness." "He's been very good to us," Gabriella replied, carefully neutral. Mrs. Lowry's knowing eyes twinkled. "More than good, I'd wager. A man doesn't risk his life for just anyone." Gabriella felt a blush creep up her neck. "It's complicated. Life generally is, my dear, especially matters of the heart." Mrs. Lowry set aside her knitting, her expression turning serious. "My Henry and I had 42 years together before the Lord took him. Not nearly long enough, but we made the most of every day. Know why? Why? Because we understood that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every morning when you wake up. A choice to be kind, to be patient, to put someone else's needs alongside your own." She patted Gabriella's hand. "Don't let fear stop you from making that choice, if that's what your heart is telling you to do." The older woman's words stayed with Gabriella throughout the afternoon and into the evening. At dinner, she found herself watching Ethan, the gentleness with which he handled the twins, the respect he showed to Mrs. Lowry, the easy camaraderie he shared with his cousin. In every interaction, she saw evidence of the man he truly was, beyond the skills with a gun or horse that had first drawn her attention. After the twins were settled for the night, Gabriella found herself restless. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the wide porch that encircled the ranch house. The night was clear, the sky a vast canvas of stars undiminished by town lights. The air was cool and fragrant with pine and sage. She wasn't entirely surprised when the door opened behind her and Ethan stepped out, as if drawn by the same restlessness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the porch railing. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. "Daniel leaves tomorrow." It feels wrong to ask him to take such risks for us, he offered, Ethan reminded her. And he's right, it would be foolish for me to go. Tanner's looking for any excuse to put a bullet in me. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft whicker of horses in the paddock, the rustle of wind through the pines. About last night, Ethan began, his voice hesitant in a way she'd never heard before. What I said. I hope I didn't overstep. Gabriella turned to face him, finding courage in the darkness. You didn't overstep. You surprised me, that's all, in a good way or a bad way. There was a vulnerability in the question that touched her deeply. In a good way, she assured him. But also in a way that made me realize how unprepared I am for whatever this is between us. Ethan nodded slowly. I understand, it's too soon. After Thomas and with everything else that's happening, no, she interrupted gently. It's not that, or not just that. She took a deep breath. When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that all I had left was being a mother to the twins. I didn't expect to feel this again. This, Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper, this warmth, this sense that I'm not alone. This feeling that maybe there could be more to my life than just survival. She looked up at him, finding his eyes in the starlight. It scares me, Ethan. It scares me too, he admitted. I've spent years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never letting myself get close to anyone. It was easier that way, especially after the war. He reached out, his fingers lightly touching hers on the railing. But then I saw you being dragged out of town, with your babies crying, and something inside me just broke open. Gabriella turned her hand, allowing their fingers to intertwine. I don't know what happens next, with Tanner, with the land, with any of it, but I do know that I don't want to face it without you. Ethan's other hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. You won't have to. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose to meet him, their lips coming together in a kiss that was soft and questioning at first, then deepening as they both found the answer they were seeking. When they finally broke apart, Gabriella rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Ethan's arms encircled her, strong and protective, yet asking nothing more than she was ready to give. We should take this slow, she murmured. For the twins' sake. For all our sakes. We have time, Ethan agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Whatever happens with the land, with Tanner we have time to figure out what we want to build together. They remained on the porch for a long while, talking quietly about possibilities and hopes, fears and dreams. By the time they returned inside, something had shifted between them, a commitment made, not in haste or desperation, but in the quiet certainty of two people who had found in each other something worth cherishing. The following weeks fell into a pattern of waiting and preparation. Daniel returned from Willow Creek with mixed news. He had managed to collect several affidavits supporting Gabriella's character and refuting the theft charges, including strong statements from Jacob and Martha Peters. But he also confirmed that Tanner was still actively searching for them, and Henderson had indeed petitioned the local court to seize Gabriella's land for abandonment. Stern was cautiously optimistic about their legal chances, but warned that the process would be slow. In the meantime, life at the Double F Ranch continued. Gabriella found herself settling into a new routine, helping Mrs. Lowry with household tasks and caring for the twins, who thrived in the stable environment. They were beginning to pull themselves up now, determined to stand and explore their expanding world. Ethan threw himself into work around the ranch, his skills with horses proving invaluable to Daniel's breeding operation. The cousins spent long days working with the yearlings, breaking them gently to saddle and training them for eventual sale. In the evenings, Ethan would return tired but satisfied, always making time to play with the twins before they went to sleep. Daniel's sons, Jacob and Matthew, had initially been wary of the newcomers, but they quickly warmed to Gabriella and became utterly enchanted with the twins. Matthew, the younger at 16, had a natural way with babies and often volunteered to watch them while Gabriella helped with dinner preparations. "You're good with them," she commented one evening as she watched Matthew entertaining the twins with a makeshift puppet show using his bandana. "I like kids," the boy replied with an easy shrug. "Pa says I should have been born a girl the way I fuss over babies, but I figure there's no shame in it. My ma loved children, guess I get it from her." As August turned to September and the aspens began to show hints of gold, Gabriella and Ethan's relationship deepened. They were discreet, mindful of propriety and the still fresh nature of their feelings, but their growing attachment was evident to everyone at the ranch. Daniel teased his cousin good-naturedly, while Mrs. Lowry watched with approving eyes, occasionally offering gentle advice to Gabriella about managing a stubborn man. It was during this time that Stern brought news that the territorial court had agreed to hear their case, but not until November, still 6 weeks away. The delay was frustrating, but it also gave them more time to build their legal argument and gather additional evidence. Then, on a crisp morning in late September, a rider came galloping up to the ranch house, raising a cloud of dust that brought everyone outside to see what the commotion was about. It was one of Stern's clerks, his face flushed with exertion. "Mr. Stern sent me," he gasped as Daniel helped him dismount. "He's just received word from Willow Creek. Henderson's men burned down Mrs. Davis's cabin last night." The news hit Gabriella like a physical blow. "They burned it, all of it," the clerk nodded grimly. "According to Mr. Peters, who sent the telegram, they did it under cover of darkness. By the time anyone noticed the fire, it was too late to save anything." "Was anyone hurt?" Ethan asked, his arm going protectively around Gabriella's shoulders. "No, sir. The place was empty, of course. But Mr. Peters says Henderson's men were quite open about it afterward, drinking in the saloon and boasting that they'd taken care of the problem." Daniel's expression was thunderous. "This changes things. Burning a homestead is a serious crime, even in territories where the law is loose. Stern needs to petition for an immediate hearing based on this new development." The clerk nodded. "That's exactly what he's doing, sir. He sent me to tell you that he's riding to Denver tomorrow to speak directly with the territorial judge. He thinks this could accelerate the case significantly." The news brought a mixture of hope and grief. Gabriella mourned the loss of the home she had shared with Thomas, the place where her children had been born. Everything was gone now, the furniture Thomas had built with his own hands, the quilt her mother had sent when the twins were born, the small treasures and mementos of their life together. That night after the twins were asleep, Ethan found Gabriella sitting alone on the porch, tears streaming silently down her face. "I'm sorry about the cabin," he said softly, sitting beside her. "I know how much it meant to you." "It's not just the cabin," she replied, wiping at her tears. "It's the memories. Thomas and I built that place together, board by board. He carved our initials into the mantelpiece the day we moved in. He said it was our forever home." Fresh tears spilled over. "Now it's gone, as if we were never there at all." Ethan took her hand, his touch gentle. "The memories aren't gone, Gabriella. You carry them with you, and you'll share them with Sarah and Samuel when they're old enough to understand. I know, it's just—" She sighed deeply. "It feels like losing him all over again. Like the last physical connection to our life together has been destroyed." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I never knew Thomas, not really. Just enough to tip my hat to him in town and exchange a few words at the general store. But I know he must have been a good man because he chose you, and because he left behind two beautiful children who have his spirit in them. Gabriella looked up at him, touched by the sentiment. He would have liked you, I think. He always said you could judge a man by how he treats those weaker than himself. By that measure, you would have earned his respect. I hope I would have, Ethan said sincerely. And I hope he would approve of what's growing between us. I'd never want to dishonor his memory. Thomas wanted me to be happy, Gabriella said with quiet certainty. When he was dying, he made me promise that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life grieving, that I would find joy again for myself and for the babies. She squeezed Ethan's hand. I think he would be glad that I found you. The burning of the cabin proved to be a turning point in their legal battle. News of Henderson's brazen act spread quickly, turning public opinion against him even in Willow Creek. Several more townspeople came forward with affidavits supporting Gabriella, including the town doctor, who testified that Thomas Davis had specifically left the land to his wife and children, with clear instructions that it should never be sold to Henderson. Stern, true to his word, secured an expedited hearing before the territorial court. The date was set for October 15th, just 2 weeks away. The lawyer was confident of their chances now that Henderson had shown his true colors so publicly. Judges don't look kindly on men who burn down widows' homes, he explained during a visit to the ranch. Especially not when those widows have infant children. The sympathy factor alone would be significant, but combined with the evidence we've gathered of the false charges and Henderson's attempts to seize the water rights, I believe we have a very strong case. Will I need to testify? Gabriella asked, anxiety clear in her voice. Yes, Stern replied gently. As will Ethan. Your first-hand accounts are crucial, but I'll be there to guide you through it, and the judge will ensure that proceedings remain civil. What about Tanner? Ethan asked, his expression hardening at the thought of facing the corrupt sheriff again. He's been summoned to appear as well, along with Henderson. They'll have their own lawyer, of course, but from what I hear, they're already on the defensive. Burning the cabin was a strategic error on their part. It made them look like the villains they are. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of preparation. Stern came to the ranch several times to work with Gabriella and Ethan on their testimony, helping them anticipate the questions they might face and coaching them on how to present their accounts clearly and effectively. Daniel arranged for a wagon to transport them all to Denver for the hearing. Mrs. Lowry insisted on accompanying them to help with the twins during the proceedings. Even Jacob and Matthew volunteered to come along, partly out of curiosity about the city, but mostly to show their support. The night before their departure, Gabriella found herself too anxious to sleep. After checking on the twins, who were slumbering peacefully in their makeshift cradles, she slipped out onto the porch, hoping the night air would calm her nerves. She was not surprised when Ethan joined her a few minutes later, as had become their custom over the past weeks. He handed her a cup of hot tea, steam rising in the cool night air. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, leaning against the porch railing beside her. Too many thoughts, she admitted. What if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Henderson's influence reaches even to the territorial court? What if it all works out exactly as it should? Ethan interrupted gently. What if justice actually prevails? Gabriella smiled despite her anxiety. You're an optimist. I'm a realist, he corrected. And the reality is that we have the truth on our side, a good lawyer, and a strong case. Henderson might have money and influence, but he's also arrogant and careless. Burning your cabin showed his true nature. And if we win, what then? The question held all the uncertainty of their future. Ethan set his cup aside and turned to face her fully. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. If the court rules in your favor, you'll have your land back but no home on it. Rebuilding would take time and money. I know, she sighed. I've been worrying about that too. Even with the water rights, the land itself won't provide an income right away. And the twins need a stable home now, not months from now when a cabin might be rebuilt. I have a proposal, Ethan said, his voice taking on a formal quality that made Gabriella look at him sharply. Not that kind of proposal, he added with a quick smile, though that may come in time if you're willing. But for now, a practical suggestion. I'm listening. Daniel's operation is growing. He needs permanent help, not just a temporary hand. He's offered me a partnership in the horse breeding business, a small share at first, building over time as I contribute to its success. That's wonderful, Gabriella said sincerely. You have a gift with horses. Daniel is fortunate to have you. The thing is, Ethan continued, if I accept, I'd be staying here at the Double F, making a home here. He took a deep breath. I'd like you and the twins to stay too, not as guests, but as family, my family. Gabriella's heart beat faster at the implications of his words. Ethan, are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Gabriella Davis. I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that dusty street, defiant even with your babies crying and Tanner trying to drag you away. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to build a life with you. Tears sprang to Gabriella's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, she whispered. I wasn't looking for love again, wasn't expecting it. But you came into our lives like a whirlwind, and now I can't imagine a future without you in it. Ethan took her hands in his. I'm not trying to replace Thomas. I know he'll always hold a special place in your heart as the twins' father and your first love. But I'm hoping there's room in your heart for me too. There is, she assured him, squeezing his hands. So much room. The twins adore you already. You've become so important to them, and to me. So you'll consider it, staying here, making a life together. Yes, she said without hesitation. But what about the land? Thomas wanted it to be the twins' inheritance. It still can be, Ethan replied. If we win the case, the land is yours legally. You could lease the water rights to responsible ranchers who won't abuse the privilege. The income would provide for the twins' future, and when they're grown, they can decide what to do with their inheritance. It was a sensible solution, one that honored Thomas's wishes while allowing them to move forward with their lives. Gabriella felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since Thomas's death, the future seemed not just survivable but full of promise. There's one more thing, Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying this for a week now, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a simple gold band with a small, sparkling stone. It was my mother's. Daniel kept it for me all these years. Gabriella's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her. I know we agreed to take things slow, and I'll wait as long as you need, but I wanted you to have this now as a promise. A promise that whatever happens in Denver, whatever the court decides, I'll be by your side. Always. Tears flowed freely down Gabriella's cheeks as she looked at the earnest face of the man kneeling before her, the man who had risked everything to save her and her children, who had shown his love not just in words but in countless acts of kindness and courage. Yes, she whispered, her voice catching. Yes, Ethan Foster, I will marry you. Not someday, not in some distant future, but as soon as this court business is settled. I don't want to wait any more. The joy that blazed across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along, then rose and gathered her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of all they had found in each other and all they hoped to build together. When they finally broke apart, Gabriella felt as though she was seeing the world anew, sharper, brighter, full of possibilities she had thought forever lost to her. We should get some rest, Ethan said reluctantly. Long journey tomorrow. But neither of them moved right away, content to stand together beneath the vast canopy of stars, savoring the moment and the promise it held. The journey to Denver took 2 days by wagon, with overnight stays in small towns along the way. The twins, now accustomed to Ethan and clearly comfortable with him, alternated between riding in their mother's lap and his, their cheerful babbling providing a welcome distraction from the anxiety of the approaching hearing. Denver was a bustling city compared to the small towns they were accustomed to, with brick buildings, boardwalks, and a constant flow of people and vehicles. The territorial court was housed in an imposing stone building in the center of town, its steps already crowded with officials and citizens when they arrived on the morning of the hearing. Stern met them at the entrance, his confidence a reassuring presence. "Everything is in order," he assured them. "The judge assigned to our case is Hiram Blackwell, a fair man with a reputation for seeing through pretense. If Henderson and Tanner try to lie, he'll know it." Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. News of the case had spread, capturing public interest with its elements of corruption, injustice, and the plight of a young widow and her children. Several newspaper reporters were present, scribbling notes in preparation for their articles. Gabriella's heart sank when she saw Tanner and Henderson seated at a table on the opposite side of the room, accompanied by a sharp-looking lawyer in an expensive suit. Tanner caught her eye and smirked, but Henderson avoided looking at her, focusing intently on the papers before him. "Don't let them intimidate you," Ethan murmured, his hand squeezing hers reassuringly. "Remember, we have the truth on our side." Mrs. Lowry had taken the twins to a quiet anteroom where she would care for them during the proceedings. Gabriella missed their reassuring presence already, but knew they were better off away from the tension of the courtroom. "All rise," called the bailiff, and everyone stood as Judge Blackwell entered the room. He was older than Gabriella had expected, with silver hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the courtroom. The hearing began with opening statements from both lawyers. Stern presented a clear, compelling narrative of Gabriella's situation: her husband's death, her struggle to maintain the property, Henderson's persistent attempts to acquire the land, and finally, the false accusations that had led to her being driven from town. Henderson's lawyer countered with claims that Gabriella had indeed stolen from the general store and had abandoned her property, forfeiting any claim to it. He suggested that Ethan had interfered in the legal processes of Willow Creek and should be charged with assaulting an officer of the law. Judge Blackwell listened impassively to both sides, occasionally making notes but giving no indication of his thoughts. When the opening statements concluded, he called for the first witness, Sheriff Tanner. Tanner swaggered to the witness stand, his thumbs hooked in his belt as if he were still the unchallenged authority of Willow Creek. Under his lawyer's questioning, he recounted finding stolen items in Gabriella's cabin and claimed he had been merely enforcing the law when Ethan had interfered. "And you personally searched Mrs. Davis's cabin?" the lawyer asked. "Yes, sir. Had a complaint from Mr. Henderson that some of his property had gone missing. Found his silver pocket watch and some fancy stationery right there on her table, plain as day." "And Mrs. Davis's reaction when confronted?" Tanner's face took on a righteous expression. "Denied it, of course. Criminals always do, but the evidence was right there." When it was Stern's turn to question Tanner, he approached the stand with deliberate calm. "Sheriff, you testified that you found these items plain as day on Mrs. Davis's table. Isn't it odd that a supposed thief would leave stolen goods in such an obvious place?" Tanner shifted uncomfortably. "Not really. Most criminals ain't too bright. And yet Mrs. Davis had managed to keep her farm running single-handedly after her husband's death, caring for infant twins while doing so. That suggests a certain intelligence, wouldn't you agree?" "Objection," Henderson's lawyer called. "Speculative." I'll rephrase, Stern said smoothly. Sheriff Tanner, had there been any previous reports of theft against Mrs. Davis during her 3 years in Willow Creek? No, Tanner admitted reluctantly. In fact, wasn't she known in the community as an honest, hard-working woman? Some thought so, Tanner muttered. Stern changed tack. Sheriff, is it true that you proposed marriage to Mrs. Davis shortly before these theft accusations emerged? Tanner's face reddened. That's personal business, not relevant to this case. Judge Blackwell leaned forward. I'll decide what's relevant, Sheriff. Please answer the question. I might have mentioned it would be easier for a widow with kids to have a man around, Tanner said defensively. And she refused you. She did, Tanner admitted, his expression darkening. Multiple times, in fact. Yes, Tanner ground out. Stern nodded thoughtfully. And then, coincidentally, you found these stolen items in her cabin. Items belonging to Mr. Henderson, who had been trying to purchase Mrs. Davis's land for some time. Objection, Henderson's lawyer called. Counsel is leading the witness and implying collusion without evidence. Sustained, Judge Blackwell ruled. Rephrase, Mr. Stern. Sheriff Tanner, did you at any time discuss with Mr. Henderson ways to force Mrs. Davis off her land? No, Tanner replied, too quickly and too forcefully. Stern produced a document. I have here an affidavit from Mr. Jacob Peters, owner of the bakery in Willow Creek, stating that he overheard you and Mr. Henderson discussing, and I quote, how to get rid of the Davis woman so we can secure that water. Would you like to reconsider your answer? Tanner's face paled. Peters is lying. We also have statements from 3 other townspeople who witnessed similar conversations. Stern let that sink in before continuing. Sheriff, isn't it true that you fabricated these theft charges as revenge for Mrs. Davis's rejection and to help Mr. Henderson acquire her land? Objection. Henderson's lawyer shouted, rising to his feet. This is outrageous. But Tanner's composure had cracked. She had no right to refuse me, he burst out. A widow with 2 babies needs a husband. And that land should go to someone who can use it properly, not some woman who doesn't know the first thing about water rights. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Blackwell banged his gavel for order. That will do, Sheriff, he said sternly. You may step down. Gabriella could scarcely believe what she had just witnessed. Tanner had essentially admitted his guilt in open court, his arrogance and anger getting the better of him. The hearing continued with testimony from Henderson, who tried to distance himself from Tanner's actions, but faltered under Stern's questioning, especially when confronted with evidence about the burning of Gabriella's cabin. His denials grew less convincing as Stern methodically dismantled his story, revealing the pattern of intimidation and manipulation he had employed in his quest for the water rights. When it was Gabriella's turn to testify, she felt a momentary panic. But as she took the stand and looked out at the courtroom, she saw Ethan watching her with such confidence and love that her fear subsided. She told her story simply and honestly, her life with Thomas, his dying wish that the land remain in the family, the struggles she had faced as a widow, and the terror of being dragged from town with her crying babies. I never stole anything, she said firmly. I was raised to believe that taking what isn't yours is one of the gravest sins. I would never do such a thing, especially not with my children watching and learning from my example. Henderson's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggesting that grief and the strain of raising twins alone might have affected her judgment or memory. But Gabriella remained composed, answering each question with quiet dignity. Ethan was the final witness, describing how he had intervened when he saw Gabriella being forcibly removed from town. His testimony was straightforward and compelling, his military background and reputation for honesty lending weight to his account. When asked why he had risked so much to help Gabriella, his answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do, and because any decent man would have done the same, faced with such an injustice. As the hearing drew to a close, both lawyers presented their final arguments. Stern emphasized the pattern of corruption and intimidation, the false nature of the charges, and the clear attempt to steal Gabriella's rightful property. Henderson's lawyer, sensing defeat, focused on technicalities and procedural issues, but his arguments lacked conviction. Judge Blackwell retired to consider his ruling, leaving the courtroom in tense anticipation. Gabriella and Ethan joined Mrs. Lowry and the twins in the anteroom, where Sarah and Samuel greeted their mother with happy gurgles, unaware of the momentous proceedings taking place. "You were magnificent," Ethan told Gabriella, his eyes shining with pride. "Clear, composed, unshakable." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But then I looked at you and I remembered what we were fighting for, not just the land but the principle of it. The right to live without fear of men like Tanner and Henderson." When they were called back into the courtroom an hour later, Judge Blackwell's expression gave nothing away as he took his seat. The room fell silent, every eye on the silver-haired judge as he prepared to deliver his ruling. "Having considered the evidence presented in this case," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "I find that the charges against Mrs. Gabriella Davis were indeed fabricated, the result of a conspiracy between Sheriff Harold Tanner and Mr. James Henderson to deprive her of her rightful property." A murmur of approval ran through the spectators. Gabriella gripped Ethan's hand tightly, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "The court therefore rules that all charges against Mrs. Davis are dismissed, and her title to the property in question is affirmed and protected under territorial law." Judge Blackwell turned his stern gaze on Henderson and Tanner. "Furthermore, Sheriff Tanner is hereby removed from his position, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into his abuse of authority. Mr. Henderson is ordered to pay restitution for the destruction of Mrs. Davis's cabin in the amount of $5,000. The amount was staggering far more than the humble cabin had been worth, but reflective of the judge's clear disgust at Henderson's actions. Henderson's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent, aware that further protest would only worsen his situation. "Mrs. Davis," the judge continued, his expression softening slightly, "the court recognizes the hardship you have endured. The restitution ordered should allow you to rebuild your home and provide for your children while you re-establish your life on your land. This court stands ready to enforce its ruling, should there be any further attempts to interfere with your rightful property." "Thank you, Your Honor," Gabriella replied, her voice steady despite the tears of relief that threatened to fall. As the court adjourned, well-wishers surrounded them, offering congratulations and support. Several of the newspaper reporters approached, eager for quotes for their stories. Stern managed the crowd expertly, ensuring that Gabriella wasn't overwhelmed while allowing enough access to ensure that the story in Henderson and Tanner's disgrace would be widely publicized. "What will you do now?" one reporter asked Gabriella. "Will you return to Willow Creek immediately?" Before she could answer, Ethan stepped forward, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "Mrs. Davis has been through enough today," he said firmly. "She'll make her decisions in her own time without pressure from anyone." Outside the courthouse, Daniel had the wagon waiting. The small group made their way through the crowd, receiving pats on the back and words of encouragement from strangers who had been moved by their story. That evening, they celebrated their victory with a dinner at Denver's finest hotel, courtesy of Daniel. As they toasted their success with sparkling cider, out of respect for Gabriella's abstention as a nursing mother, the conversation turned to the future. "So, little sister," Daniel said, raising his glass to Gabriella with a warm smile, Will you be returning to Willow Creek to rebuild? Or might you be persuaded to make your home elsewhere? Gabriella looked at Ethan, a silent communication passing between them. Actually, she said, turning back to Daniel, we've been discussing that very question. And Mrs. Lowry prompted, though the twinkle in her eye suggested she already knew the answer. And we've decided that the Double F might be in need of a new cabin, Ethan replied. Something suitable for a family of 4 with room to grow. Daniel's face split into a wide grin. I was hoping you'd say that. The boys and I have already picked out a spot that rise overlooking the east pasture, best view on the whole ranch. You knew? Gabriella asked, surprised. Suspected, Daniel corrected. My cousin here isn't nearly as subtle as he thinks he is. Been watching him moon over you for weeks now. I do not moon, Ethan protested, but his ears had turned red. Like a lovesick calf, Jacob teased, earning a playful cuff from his father. But what about my land? Gabriella asked. Thomas wanted it to stay in the family for the children. And so it shall, Ethan assured her. We can lease the water rights as we discussed. Use the income to set up trust funds for Sarah and Samuel. When they're grown, they can decide whether to sell, build there, or continue the arrangement. The land remains theirs as their father wished. It was the perfect solution, honoring Thomas's memory and wishes while allowing them to move forward with their lives. The thought brought a sense of peace to Gabriella that she hadn't felt since Thomas's death. There's one more thing, Ethan said, taking Gabriella's hand. He looked around at the assembled family, for that was what they had become before continuing. Gabriella has done me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. The announcement was met with cheers and congratulations, though few seemed surprised. Mrs. Lowry dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Daniel slapped his cousin heartily on the back. The twins, sensing the excitement, joined in with happy squeals. When's the wedding? Matthew asked eagerly. Gabriella and Ethan exchanged glances. We were thinking spring, she replied, when the wildflowers are blooming in the meadow. A simple ceremony at the ranch, with just family and a few friends. Perfect, Mrs. Lowry declared. Just enough time to prepare everything properly. I've been saving some special fabric that would make a beautiful wedding dress. As the conversation flowed around them, Ethan leaned closer to Gabriella. Happy, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. More than I ever thought possible, she replied softly. When Tanner dragged me out of town that day, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. Ethan's eyes were tender as they met hers. I knew the moment I saw you standing there, refusing to break despite everything, that you were the strongest, most remarkable woman I'd ever meet. I'm the luckiest man alive that you've chosen to share your life with me. We chose each other, Gabriella corrected gently, and I think perhaps we were meant to all along. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day with the meadows carpeted in wildflowers, Gabriella Davis became Gabriella Foster in a simple ceremony on the Double F Ranch. She wore a dress of creamy satin that Mrs. Lowry had indeed been saving for just such an occasion, with her hair crowned in fresh blossoms. Sarah and Samuel, now a year old and taking their first tentative steps, were carried down the makeshift aisle by Daniel's sons, serving as the world's youngest attendants. Ethan waited beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, looking more handsome than Gabriella had ever seen him in a new suit that Daniel had insisted on purchasing for the occasion. His face, as he watched her approach, held such love and wonder that Gabriella felt her heart might burst with happiness. The small gathering of friends and family, including Jacob and Martha Peters, who had made the journey from Willow Creek, witnessed their vows, simple promises to love and cherish, to support and protect, to build a life of joy and purpose together. I never expected to find love again, Gabriella said as she slipped a ring onto Ethan's finger. But you rode into my darkest hour and brought light with you. You saved not just my life and my children's lives, but my heart as well. I promise to love you all the days of my life, to be your partner in all things, and to create with you the family that all four of us deserve." Ethan's voice was husky with emotion as he responded. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. You've shown me what it means to be truly brave, to stand for what's right no matter the cost. I promise to stand beside you always, to love and cherish you and our children, and any others we might be blessed with, to be the husband and father that you all deserve." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the assembled guests. The twins, not to be outdone, added their own excited babbling to the celebration. The cabin that Daniel and his sons had built for them stood ready nearby, a sturdy, spacious home with windows that caught the morning light, and a wide porch where the family could gather on summer evenings. Inside, furniture crafted by Daniel and Jacob awaited, along with quilts and curtains made with love by Mrs. Lowry and the women of the nearby settlements. That evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, and the celebration continued with music and dancing in the main house, Ethan and Gabriella slipped away to the porch of their new home. The twins were happily being spoiled by their newfound extended family, allowing the newlyweds a rare moment alone. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," Ethan said, drawing Gabriella close as they looked out over the land that would nurture their family in the years to come. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "It's been so long since I truly felt at home anywhere." And now, she turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Now I know that home isn't a place at all. It's this you and me and our children. Wherever we are together, that's home." Ethan's kiss was tender, a promise of all the days and nights to come. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky, witnesses to the new beginning they had forged from hardship and courage, from justice and love. In the years that followed, the cabin on the rise overlooking the east pasture of the Double F Ranch would fill with laughter and love. Sarah and Samuel would grow strong and curious, joined in time by a brother and sister who bore the mingled features of both their parents. The trust established from the leasing of the water rights at the Davis homestead would ensure that all four children would have the means to pursue their dreams as they came of age. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Ethan and Gabriella would often sit together on their porch, watching the stars and marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began on a dusty street in Willow Creek, when a desperate young mother with crying twins was dragged from town, and a cowboy with courage in his heart rode after them.